It's February the 12th, which means it's Chinese New Year. Xinye Haile. Today I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk about this great nation, not so great government, and explore the idea of China as a foreign force, as a symbol of the alien in Western philosophy. And we're gonna start with the China brain. China's population is estimated to be around 1.4 billion people, and we are estimated to have around 100 times that many neurons in our brain, around 100 billion. This thought experiment named China Brain asks us to imagine that the government of China would ask every citizen to simulate the activity of one neuron in our brain. Now the question is that let's imagine that they would have to call each other via telephone to simulate the axons and dendrites that connect different neurons, right? And the government would give out orders like, yeah, you call that person at 11:05 and then 11:07 and then 11:11 and then 11:25 and so on. And every citizen would have a list of tasks like that. Well, if that would happen, would the Chinese nation as a whole become a sentient being, or would the Chinese telecommunication system become a sentient being? Because it is basically simulating the workings of a brain, right? Now, according to the China brain argument, the whole Chinese nation would in fact be functionally equivalent to the workings of a brain. So if you adopt functionalism, you should agree that this telecommunication line in China would in fact become a conscious being. Functionalists would say that you can simulate and in fact give the emergence to a consciousness in, let's say, a computer that would successfully simulate the workings of a brain. The neurons don't have to be exactly as they are in a brain. They could be made out of silicon, for example, and this would be no limitation to the system that simulates our brain having consciousness. And some functionalists, such as Dennett, did in fact say that yes, as a functionalist I have to accept this, and I do contend that should such a coordinated action take place, this in fact would give rise to consciousness. And why would we think that? Because neurons are in principle not the only material that gives rise to consciousness. You can have other things that would give rise to consciousness. This argument inspired one of the most well-known arguments in 20th century philosophy. It was proposed by John Searle in 1980. And it is called the Chinese room argument, an argument that you probably do know, but I will go through it. The idea is that you have a man in a room where he is given Chinese letters from the outside, and he does not speak Chinese, he does not know any Chinese letters, but he does have a rule book that says how he should reply to that message. He sees some symbols and he does not understand the symbols, but he has a book where he can find those symbols, and then he finds rules about which symbol he should write if he sees that particular symbol. He writes that on the paper and then he hands out the paper, and the person that would be standing outside the room and would put those Chinese letters in and then would be given some Chinese letters out. If the reply in Chinese would be meaningful, and we do think it would be meaningful if those rule books would in fact be complete. That person from the outside would have the impression that this person in the room in fact does speak Chinese and does understand Chinese, and that they are having a genuine conversation. This argument is an answer to the idea of Alan Turing, that is basically if you have a computer program, the test for whether that computer program has a consciousness is the so-called Turing Test. If it behaves like a human and can fool you into thinking that it is a human, then you have no reason to say that it doesn't have a consciousness, because if you would do that, by analogy, you would have to contend that every other human doesn't have a consciousness as well, because the only criterion by which you judge other people to have consciousness is their intelligent behavior. And if a computer would have intelligent behavior, why are you supposing that it doesn't have a consciousness? The purpose of the Chinese room argument is to show that just intelligent behavior does not vouch for there being understanding or consciousness at all in a system.
Like testing a chess computer by only playing chess.
How else do you test a chess computer?
Well, it depends. You know, I mean, you can play it to find out if it makes good moves, but that won't tell you if it knows that it's playing chess, and it won't tell you if it knows what chess is.
So it's simulation versus actual.
Yes. Yeah.
This is also vaguely connected to Wittgenstein's paradox. More people can behave in such a way that you would believe them, that they are understanding what they are doing, and they could say things that you could take for a proof that they in fact do understand what they are talking about and what they are doing, but in fact you can never know, according to the Wittgenstein's paradox. Now let's just take a second to appreciate the Chinese language. When you speak the Chinese language, the meaning of your words will depend on your intonation. You can say ma or ma or some other variations of those sounds. There's like 5, but my European sensibilities are literally, not distinguishing those sounds.
Ma.
Yeah.
Ma.
Ma. Are we doing it right?
Close.
Okay.
Ma.
For example, depending whether you will say ma or ma, you will say a horse or a mother. I'm not even sure if I said, I probably did not say the right sounds because I have no idea. To me, some sounds that I have not been given the opportunity to learn how to distinguish, they will be just the same. And on this point, I would like to cite Wittgenstein's opening of culture and value. If we hear a Chinese, we tend to take his speech for inarticulate gurgling. Someone who understands Chinese will recognize language in what he hears. Similarly, I often cannot recognize the human being in someone, etc. I love the etc. part. It is just such a stamp of Wittgenstein's quotes. It's like the equivalent of and so on and so on. No, Marx, we should... According to Wittgenstein, we can never truly understand the language until we understand the way of life from which it is coming. For example, he said that if a lion could talk, we could never understand it because we do not know what it's like to be a lion. And likewise, he says, for example, that Chinese gestures might be as difficult for Europeans to understand as Chinese sentences. That's because we don't truly understand the culture, and until we don't understand the culture, we have no way of understanding the language. I remember my first encounter with Indians when they were like this, and I was like, whoa, what is going on? What is this gesture? I can't think of any particular Chinese gesture, but for example, the Japanese, they will handle you quite differently. They are very polite, for example. So if you go into a shop in the USA and, you behave weirdly, they're gonna be like, wait a minute, what are you doing? But the Japanese, they're gonna be like, konnichiwa, omae wa mushinderu. But the cultural significance and the historical significance as well of language is what gave rise to hermeneutics, the theory and methodology. To understand the language, one must understand the culture and time where the text was written, for example. An example of why we need hermeneutics that I love to give is the American physicist Thomas Kuhn reading Aristotle in the 20th century, and he read Aristotle's books, Physics, and he read it and he was like, wow, Aristotle is such an idiot. I cannot believe, how could you even say that? That doesn't make any sense. This is so illogical. Does he not see? I mean, how is that possible for someone to make so little sense in a book? And then after he kept on reading the book, he slowly came to realize that, of course, the words that Aristotle was using were meant quite differently from what a modern physicist would take them to mean. And once Kuhn realized that he has to make a kind of vocabulary switch in reading Aristotle and see the words in that sense in which Aristotle actually meant them to mean, he could understand Aristotle way better, and he could see that in fact the things Aristotle said were quite reasonable. So yes, to understand a language is way more than just translating terms. You have to understand the culture. Anyways, that's it for this video. I just wanted an excuse to talk about Chinese New Year's, and that's the two arguments, and the third one kind of each that I could think of in this regard. Now this is the opportunity that if you came so far in this video, you should look down into the comment section, where hopefully people will give some more examples of the idea of China as a foreign of the unknown. This is a song that I learned when I first celebrated Chinese New Year's with some locals there. 新年快乐，新年快乐，祝福到这新年快乐，我们整个我们跳舞，祝福到这新年快乐。I will also learn the guitar.